Hello, assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everyone. Auzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala sayyidina Muhammad al-Fatih al-Khatim wa ala alihi haqqa qadriyam daril azim. Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm back on my series of lectures on the topic Reflection on the Verses of the Holy Qur'an. If you can remember, in the last session, we were discussing the difference between the divine command and the divine prohibition. We started this with the story of Prophet Adam and the devil, how the devil defied the divine command. He refused to comply with it. In the case of the devil, it was a command. In the case of Adam, it was a prohibition. So you can see the difference. In the case of a command, it requires compliance, instant compliance, the moment it is issued. While prohibition must be complied with throughout one's life, because if something is declared forbidden by the Almighty Allah, no one is allowed to commit it except if another rule is handed down that legalizes it. That was during the period when abrogation was possible. But after the departure of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, no abrogation will take place with regard to legislative court. So here you can see a command requires instant compliance, and once complied with, then one is done. For example, if you are commanded to pray, as soon as you finish praying, then you are free to go. If you are commanded to do this, as soon as you are done with it, you are good to go. If you are, for instance, commanded, if you are instructed by the Almighty Allah to carry out a particular devotion, once you finish conducting that devotion, then you can. But in the case of prohibition, it is not that do this. It means don't do this. Don't do this means that you should remain compliant with the prohibition, that up to the end of your life, do not do this. That is, we need to understand the different aspects of the two orders. That's one of them a command, the other a prohibition. In the case of a command, it must be done the way it is required by the law. That is, when you are commanded to perform prayers, you have to perform it the way it is, the way it is being described by the Almighty Allah, by the lawgiver. That is the Almighty Allah. So you cannot just perform it the way you want. No. You have to perform it the way it should be performed. Let's pick an example with 5 daily prayers, for example. We know that we are required by the Islamic Legislative Court to be steadfast in prayers. It is being repeatedly mentioned in the Holy Qur'an in quite a number of passages. Wa aqimu salata, wa atu zakata, and so on and so forth. That we should be steadfast in prayers and give regular charity. In the case of prayer, it is a routine affair. It's something that should be performed on a daily basis, 5 times a day, obligatory prayers. So they have their conditions, they have their requirements, they have their prerequisites, and so on. ranging from purification, whether one is in a state of purity or not, and whether the state of purity reach the standard required by the law. For example, if one is in a state of impurity, that's what they call al-hadath al-akbar. For example, when somebody is in a state of impurity as a result of having an affair with his wife, in this case, he is required to take a ritual bath. After the bath, then he performs ablution. Then with the ablution, he is now set to perform his prayers. That is, he has already fulfilled the requirement of the requirements for the performance of prayer. Anything short of that will never be accepted by the law. So what is required of him is to make sure that he fulfills the requirement of the purity, that the required state of purity. That is, in the after having taken the bath is being described by the Sharia how it should be taken. That is, one has to make sure that his body, the entirety of his body is washed in the process of taking the bath. That is, no part of his body should be spared. The whole parts of his body must be adequately washed. Then in the case of ablution, there are what we call the designated organs or the designated parts of man that should be washed in ablution, ranging from his hands, his face, that is his arms, and his feet. And his feet should be properly washed as well. He should make sure that no part of these places that is spared. Then he will go for his prayer. But as soon as you finish the prayer, then you are free. So that is why in the case of a command, whenever a command is issued, any command from the Almighty Allah, whenever it is issued, it means that one has to make sure that he fulfills the requirement for the performance of that particular divine order. And then once you finish, you are through. In the case of prohibition, because you are not required to do anything, rather you are required to avoid doing a particular thing, then that means that particular thing you are forbidden from doing stands for prohibited throughout your life, that you cannot do it. So that is why in the case of the devil, he was ordered to proceed to Adam and he refused to comply and he got cursed. He got cursed not because of his disobedience, but rather because he justified the crime he committed. He justified his disobedience to the divine order. So that justification destroyed him. In the case of Adam, it was not a command, it was rather a prohibition. The Almighty Allah said, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, wa la taqrabu hadhihi shajarata fatakuna minaz zalimin." Never approach that tree lest you would be among the wrongdoers. So you can see it is a prohibition rather than a command. So that means that prohibition remained enforced throughout the existence of Adam in the paradise or until his death, that he should approach that tree. So that's why it's a little bit difficult to observe. That is in the case of prohibition. And it is easier in another way, because you are not required to do anything, rather you are required not to do a particular thing. In this aspect, it is easier than a command. And In another aspect, that it must be complied with throughout one's existence here on earth, it is more difficult because of the temptation. That is why in the school of Imam Malik, that is juristic school, he developed a particular principle he called it Saddu Zaria. Saddu Zaria means that one shouldn't approach a place where a particular sin is being committed with temptation, so as to avoid temptation. That if you are forbidden from getting into a particular house, for example, in the school of Malik, he will warn you against going to that particular area, not that house. For example, if you are forbidden from entering into a particular house, Imam Malik will forbid you from coming closer to the area in which that house is sited. So you can see that is, and Malik got inspired by this particular verse and other verses in the Holy Qur'an, that a particular thing is meant to be forbidden. Rather, the Almighty Allah will say you shouldn't even come close to where the crime might be committed. That is, it is the tree that Adam was forbidden not to. It was the fruits of the tree that Adam was forbidden. But instead of telling him not to consume the fruits of that tree, the Almighty Allah said, don't ever approach that particular tree. That is, don't even come close to committing a sin, let alone committing it. وَلَا تَقْرَبَا هَذِهِ الشَّجَرَةَ فَتَكُونَ مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ. And that is why in some verses in the Holy Quran, more especially the verse of the chapter, Surah Al-Baqarah, or the cow, where the Almighty Allah, while laying down the rules and regulation concerning fasting in the month of Ramadan, the Almighty Allah said, Tilka hududullahi fala takrabuha, while forbidding us from approaching our wives during the daytime of the month of Ramadan, the Almighty Allah said, these are the laid down rules. These are the set bounds. These are the bounds set by the Almighty Allah. So never approach them. Don't even approach the bounds, let alone transgressing them. So for you to transgress any bound, you need to approach it first. So you are forbidden from approaching the bound, let alone crossing it. So you wouldn't cross the bound without you approaching it. So don't even come close to the bound. The Almighty Allah said, Tilka hududullahi fala takrabuha. You observe that in the Holy Quran, most of the warnings that are issued to human beings not to approach a particular thing involves matters relating to women in most cases. When you hear prohibitions in the Holy Quran such as Tilka hududullahi fala ta'taduha, these are the bounds set by the Almighty Allah. Don't ever cross them. Here he did not say don't come close to them. Rather, don't cross the bounds. Don't transgress the bounds. But in matters relating to women, because the Almighty Allah knows how weak we are when confronted with women, that is why the Almighty Allah said we shouldn't even come close. It is in this particular sense that the prohibition of zina in the chapter Surah Isra, the Almighty Allah did not say that we shouldn't commit adultery. Rather, He said, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. don't even come close to committing adultery, because he knows how weak we are. Once we get ourselves close to committing the crime, then we can easily fall victims. We can't avoid committing it. That is why the Almighty Allah said, "Wala taqrabu," don't even come close to zina. And with regard to fasting in the month of Ramadan, the Almighty Allah warns us against coming close to our wives during the daytime, because He knows we are very weak. We can't restrain ourselves when confronted with our wives. That is why the Almighty Allah says, "Wala tilka hududullahi." When He says, "Wala tubashiruhunna wa antum akifuna fil masajid," while observing itikaf during the month of Ramadan, don't ever come close to your wives. Don't hug them. Wala tubashiruhunna. Don't allow your skin to touch their skin in in as much as it will lead to temptation. Don't allow that, because once you allow that, then you can't control yourself anymore. So it's in this particular context that we need to understand the regulation of Sharia with regard to any prohibition, depending on the nature of the crime being prohibited. Although that shouldn't divert us from our main topic, that is how Prophet Adam alayhi salam got pardoned and forgiven by the Almighty Allah because of his humility, because of his confession, that he confessed that he did wrong. He confessed that what he did was wrong, and that is why he got forgiven. In the case of the devil, it is because he tried to justify, as opposed to the son of Adam. In his own case, he tried to justify what he did. What he did was not wrong. In fact, it was the ideal thing to do. He wanted to use common sense in analyzing any instruction he received from the Almighty Allah, whether such instruction is worth complying with or not. That's what led to his destruction. You can see that's why I said in my last session that the devil was the first to use common sense. Common sense was first employed by the devil in analyzing the divine instruction, whether such instruction is worth complying with or not. That even if it's a divine order, it needs, one needs to, according to the devil, to assess the rationale behind the order, whether the order is worth complying with or not, and what is the wisdom and so on and so forth. Then that means that attribute of servitude is removed. Once you are considered as a servant to the Almighty Allah, then you are not expected to even reason once an order is handed down to you. You are expected to comply with it instantly. And that's what he couldn't do, because, as I said, he used what he knew, what he acquired in terms of knowledge, what he was endowed with in terms of knowledge by the Almighty Allah, in analyzing the substances, the two substances, that is the substance of which he was created, as well as the substance of which Adam was created. And he established that the substance of which he was created was superior to that of which Adam was created. So you can see here, that is why I keep saying that common sense is only common between you and I. It is you and I that agreed on it as common sense. It may sound an odd sense to some people, not common. It's only common to a particular group of people or to a particular class of people. Of course, it's a relative term. One common sense is wider than another. That there is a common sense with common acceptance by almost everybody. It may be considered very common, but the reason why it is very dangerous for one to allow himself to be led by common sense in analyzing everything is that when it comes to religion, one is supposed to subject himself to the wisdom of God. He should allow his life to be regulated by the divine wisdom, what to do, what not to do. He should allow the Almighty Allah to guide him and tell him what is right, what is wrong. Without him, and you can see how dangerous is it to employ common sense in establishing what is wrong and what is right with regard to religious matters. Of course, when it comes to worldly matters, common sense can be applied. It can be applied in worldly matters where there is no any text from the Holy Qur'an or the tradition of the Prophet ﷺ. We are allowed to use common sense. As I said earlier, there is a great relativity in common sense. One sense is commoner than another. That is, some senses are more common than others, and so on and so forth. So, but once there is a clear text in the Holy Qur'an or the tradition of the Prophet ﷺ, then no common sense is allowed to be used. What is required of a servant is compliance, absolute compliance with the provision of that text. Whatever is provided by the text in the Holy Qur'an or the tradition of to comply. And that is that. That is why we need to be very careful about that. And the Almighty Allah used this story of Prophet Adam and the devil to conduct the first test in the entire history of the universe. Before, earlier than that, no test was conducted according to the documented history. It was the first one in which the devil fell and Adam passed. How did Adam pass? How did the devil fail? He did fail because he used common sense in justifying his disobedience to his creator. How did Adam pass? Because the two of them couldn't fulfill what is required of them. The devil failed to comply, but he justified his failure. He was even remorse that he failed. For him, he did not fail. For him, he did the right thing. So justification of failure is the genesis of. In fact, if you want to keep failing in life, keep justifying your failure. I will repeat. If you want to fail, I can tell you how to fail. If you want to fail permanently in life, keep justifying your failure. The more you justify your failure, the more you keep failing. And eventually you end as a failure. You end as, in quote, justified failure. You yourself will become a justified failure. But if you want to succeed in life, first and foremost, accept your failure. As a failure, accept it. Embrace it. That you own up to your failure. That this is my failure. I know I failed. And I'm resolute. I'm resolved to make a U-turn. I have resolved that I will change. Then that will mark the beginning of your success in life. No one will succeed without him admitting at a point where he felt that he did fail. But inasmuch as he keeps justifying the failure, he will end up as what? Justified failure. That you are a failure yet justified one. It still remains a failure. Anyway, but what led to the success of Adam? Because he admitted that he failed. So the bottom line here is, have you admitted that you failed, or you are making an attempt to justify your failure? That's the bottom line. That's the great lesson that we need to derive from the entire story. How to fail, we have been taught. How to succeed, we have been taught by the Holy Qur'an. If you want to fail, of course, you have a pioneer that you can emulate. You have a role model that you can emulate if you want to fail. As weak as human being is, he succeeded as human being as weak as he is because he admitted his failure. As strong as the devil is, he did fail because he kept justifying his failure. Because he justified his failure, that's why he's bound to keep failing. You can see it is human being that cannot stand temptation. It is human being that cannot stand, quite a number of things. He cannot he cannot stand quite a number of tastes. In the case of the devil, have you ever heard that the devil was tempted? Have you? Have you ever heard a story where the devil was tempted by any creature? No. No, it's impossible. You know what? Because the devil is strong. But what led to his failure as strong as he is as a creature? Because of his arrogance and the fact that he justified his first failure. That failure, that fatal failure, the first failure that he made was as a result of his attempt to justify it. And he kept failing. Today, whoever fell in life, he fell on account of the devil. It is the devil that led him to fail. Why? Because the devil justified failure. In the case of Adam, when he failed to comply with the instruction not to approach the tree, what did he do? He showed humbleness. He showed humility. He confessed. He admitted. So the fact that he admitted his failure, that he did fail, that led to his success. That he was sent down to give birth to the whole world, in fact, to the whole human beings, and his children are elevated above all the creatures, many of the creatures. In fact, above, some of them above even the angels, because prophets are above the angels. And they are human beings, yet they are above the hierarchy of the angels. So you can see why. Because their father Adam accepted at the point he felt that he did fail. And he repented. The Almighty Allah accepted his repentance. And the Almighty Allah elevated him and accepted him. Perfection is purely divine. So, perfection in human beings is merely a relative term. So that is why if you show that you are imperfect, the Almighty Allah will accept you. That means you concede perfection to Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. As a human being, you are supposed to concede perfection to the Almighty Allah, that He is only perfect. For creatures, essentially and generally, they are not perfect. But the Almighty Allah, out of His wisdom and His benevolence, He chose prophets among them and He made them perfect and impeccable, and they are infallible. They enjoy the status of impeccability and infallibility. So that is the wisdom. And after that story of Adam and his Adam and the devil, in the chapter of Al-Baqarah, the next story, when Adam was sent down and he was promised, along with his children, that if they follow the right path, they will come back to paradise. In the case of the devil, he, along with those that he promised to lead astray, those that he promised to mislead, they will be thrown into hellfire at the end of the day. Then the next story that was picked to preach to humanity was the story of the children of Israelites. That is the Israelites. Israelites are the children and the grandchildren of Prophet Jacob, peace be upon him. Jacob happened to be a twin. Jacob and his brother were born as twins.
his brother Esau alayhi salam. And the two of them, Jacob was chosen by the Almighty Allah. The two of them were the children of Prophet Isaac. Isaac is a child to Prophet Abraham, the second child of Abraham after Ishmael. Prophet Ishmael was the first son of Prophet Abraham. Abraham, I think it would be more ideal if we start with Abraham, although the arrangement of the story is Prophet Moses and his people, then after them Prophet Abraham. But I think for us to understand it better, since it is not a recitation that we are, if we are to follow the serial arrangement of the verses of the chapter, the story of Israelite was the first to be cited before that of Abraham, because the Holy Qur'an normally take the stories according to the circumstances that led to the revelation of the verses. That is why this chapter of Al-Baqarah was one of the first revelations of Medinan origin. That was after the Prophet's migration to Medina. The chapter was revealed. It was revealed so as to preach the Jewish neighbors of the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, those who live along with him in Medina, that the Prophet they had been waiting for is being sent by the Almighty Allah. And here he is, he arrived in Medina, and they were invited to come and believe in him in the same way they believed in his predecessors, in Prophet Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, and all the prophets of Israelites, as well as Prophet Moses and Prophet Jesus Christ. That is why in the chapter, the story of Moses was cited first, after that of Prophet Adam and the devil. Why? Because the wisdom was to drive home this point, that is, as the people of Moses, the Jews witnessed the divine much more than anyone else in those days, because they did see how Pharaoh subjugated them to an untold hardship and slavery for years, until when the Almighty Allah decided to deliver them, he sent them Prophet Moses. In fact, Pharaoh had a dream in which the interpretation of which implies that a child will be born among the Israelites, at whose hands Pharaoh will lose his power. Not only would he lose his power, he will get destroyed as a result of that. So when Pharaoh narrated his dream to his people, that is to those that were experts in interpreting dreams, they interpreted the dream correctly, that yes, a child will be born among Israelites, at whose hands Pharaoh and his power will be destroyed. As a result of that, Pharaoh promulgated a law that would allow him to be slaughtering the children of Israelites at the instance of birth. If it is a male child that is born, he should be killed. If it is a female child, it should be spared. So that's how he kept slaughtering their male children in search of Moses, because he knew that for the child to grow up to manhood and struggle against him and destroy his power, he needs time to grow, right? If he must have time to grow, let him be cut short, let his life be cut short at the instance of birth. So that is why he kept slaughtering them. And it reached a point where the male population of Israelites was so much reduced to a number that drew the attention of the members of Pharaoh's cabinet, that look, these people, we rely on them as our workforce. You know, we have our workforce from Israelites. If we keep slaughtering them, then we are afraid we'll wake up one day to be serving ourselves because they are our servants. So it's better to review this policy, it's better to review this law so as to avoid losing the entire workforce to this policy of slaughtering them. That is to, in fact, it will lead to us being slaves to ourselves instead of relying on them. So because of that, the law was reviewed and the slaughter rate was reduced to only once in 2 years' time. That is, if this year, that is what you will do. If they slaughter children, male children this year, then the next year they will spare them so as to raise a generation of workforce that they can exploit. So they did that. And as a result, up to the time when Moses and Aaron were to be born, in the year in which the slaughtering was lifted, Aaron was born, the elderly brother of Moses. Then the next year in which the slaughtering was reinforced, Moses, the predestined destroyer of Pharaoh, was born in the year of slaughtering. You can see the Almighty Allah did not want to dodge this policy of Pharaoh. That's why he brought Moses in the year in which the slaughtering was reinforced. I will stop here, inshallah. When I come back, we'll continue exactly where we stop. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الله قبلك والهادي إلى صراط المستقيم. السلام عليكم.